not sure about a sentence. I think perhaps the single most convincing fact, the observation that you could point to, would be the pattern of resemblances that you see when you compare the genes using modern DNA techniques, actually looking at the letter-to-letter correspondences between genes. Compare the genes of any pair of animals you like, pair of animals, pair of plants, and then plot out the resemblances, and they fall in a perfect hierarchy, a perfect family tree. And the only alternative to it being a family tree is that the intelligent designer deliberately set out to deceive us in the most underhand and devious manner.
David, there's a video out from Richard Dawkins, famous atheist. It's got millions of views, and it's titled something like "One Fact," just a single fact to refute creationism. I like how they always say creationism. No, it should be evolutionism. That's the science fiction religion in creation. And so anyways, it's just a couple minutes. And if you watch the video, Dawkins' one single fact that apparently refutes creationism and demonstrates the validity of evolution is similarities. So similarities across the biological world that all animals share, right? These homologous patterns in DNA and morphology and how they form a hierarchy. What they mean by a hierarchy is, hey, we and a chimpanzee, humans and chimpanzees, we share more. We look more similar to a chimpanzee than we do to a dog and a fish and a bacteria. And so I'm wondering, David, what are your thoughts on that? Apparently that's the number one fact that refutes creation. What's a good response to that?
Well, I mean, I think that if we're comparing ourselves to a banana, we don't look much like a banana. So we're not going to be as similar genetically to a banana, right? If we're comparing ourselves to anything in the animal kingdom, well, apes are ape-like creatures. They have, similar skeletal structures. They have a skull that is somewhat similar. They have, ear canals that work very similar, even though they're structured differently. They have fingers. They have all of these components. So they're the closest visually to humans. And the closest visually would also mean the closest genetically to humans. So of course we're going to share similarities more with apes than we would with giraffes. We're going to share more genetic similarities with apes than we would hippopotamus, right? But at the same time, there's still a tremendous amount of diversity and a tremendous amount of difference. And so I don't think it's a great argument to use. I think it may be a fledgling argument that they have to go with to try to salvage the ideas of Darwinian evolution, but ultimately it's not very scientifically rigorous.
I completely agree. You had a discussion, and I highly recommend people check it out on your channel and also on your podcast for the full interview with Dr. Nathaniel Jensen, PhD cell biologist. And he pointed out, when it comes to this argument from hierarchical patterns, you could do the same thing with design modes of transportation. You could take a sedan, a hatchback, an SUV, and a boat.
That's right.
And the sedan's going to share more with the hatchback than it does with a boat or a skateboard. And so human engineers, therefore, accidentally build and design in hierarchical patterns or homologous patterns. And so why shouldn't God? It's good design. Isn't that right, brother?
Yeah, absolutely. Engineers use patterns that work over and over and over again. So the most brilliant engineer, once he's got a system that works, whether that's a hand or whether that's an ear or whether that's whatever it is, right? He's not going to reinvent the wheel every single time. For any creatures where that design works, he will use that design, and he did use that design. So common principles or common design points to a common designer, not common origins through evolutionary mutations.
You nailed it, brother. You nailed it. And it's funny because there's even a challenge now for the evolutionists, David. in the similar sections of DNA between humans and chimps. So even in similar genetic sequences, they're now finding differences, significant differences in the way those genes are expressed and the way those genes are regulated. So the differences abound.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just signed into the YouTube page here, and I was looking down at the chat, and James just said you could do the same with the book. They all use 26 letters, but they tell different stories, right? And I think that's actually a great analogy in and of itself, in that you have similar letters, but you can have millions upon millions of books that can touch you in different ways, but they're all using a common factor. Same as DNA is the common information language system that supports or underlies all living things.
Amen. And that was one of your examples in your presentation, was the DNA code and information in a cell. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I wrote that down in my notes. And so I find it fascinating that we have trillions of cells, right? 60 to 90 trillion cells, but in a single cell exists our entire genome, 6 billion letters.
Yeah.
You get 3 billion from mom, 3 billion from dad, and each cell is more complicated than the space shuttle. And so you have a genome per cell. That's one cell out of your trillions of cells.
Yes. Yeah. And again, those things have the ability to replicate, to basically completely recreate themselves, which is beyond, I mean, you can have a CNC machine which can recreate a pattern over and over and over again, but you have to keep feeding it the pieces of metal to recreate that pattern, right? It would be like a CNC machine just making metal out of the air, then carving it, it spits it out, and then there's more metal coming out of the air, it carves it and spits it out. That's what's happening on a biological level.
It's amazing. It's almost science fiction, but it's not fiction, it's fact.
Yeah.
And so how do these complex systems evolve?
Yeah.
And it's funny also, it's interesting, in every single cell, there are in one day 1 million DNA breaks. One cell can experience 1 million DNA breaks in a single day, yet you have 60 to 100 trillion cells. But wait a minute, we have these incredibly designed by God DNA repair enzymes that fix a lot of these DNA breaks. But what's interesting, David, and this is a major chicken and egg problem, these mutually interdependent systems, I've heard Dr. Rob Carter call them, you need the DNA repair enzymes, the information for them is encoded in the DNA. But the DNA requires the DNA repair enzymes to fix those DNA breaks that we experience daily. So to the evolutionists, the question is, right, David, what came first? The DNA or the DNA repair enzymes? Because they both need each other to work.
Yeah, that's actually the case, Donnie, for topoisomerase enzyme number 2, which decatenates. It takes links, like linked DNA strands that have gotten knotted, right? It decatenates. It basically cuts one strand of DNA, feeds it back around, sews back the strand of DNA after the knot is completely unknotted. And topoisomerase enzyme number 2 specifically does that. It's working in a biological level in our bodies, in other organisms as we speak, so that these tiny little micro machines can do their job to read the DNA and replicate it so that we don't die. And yet those little enzymes couldn't be made except through the DNA code. So as you mentioned, there's a chicken and egg problem where both things simultaneously on the same day have to be there on the same day. So they either have to both evolve on the same day, or I don't know what that was.
Was that me, or did a bunch of balloons just fly out?
Yeah, a bunch of balloons just
I guess that's the way of StreamYard saying amen, brother.
But both have to be 100% functioning, full biological systems functioning on the same day, which takes a massive gap of evolutionary engineering to accomplish.
Wow, It's incredible. Major unsolvable challenges for the evolutionist brothers.